I spent an entire year building the project that was supposed to earn me a promotion. Then my boss handed the credit and the project lead title to his favorite, while I sat 3 chairs away and watched everyone applaud. For almost a year, Atlas had been the first thing I saw every morning. I built it before the office filled with noise, during lunches that went cold beside my keyboard, and after meetings everyone else had already forgotten. By December, hundreds of Jira tickets carried my name, along with design decisions, testing notes, and every ugly little problem we'd solved along the way. Then, one Tuesday morning, my boss handed the project to Chloe. I found out through a PowerPoint slide. Atlas, Operational Intelligence Platform. Project Lead, Chloe Bennett. I stared at those words while the office hummed around me. 24 hours earlier, that line had contained my name. Chloe had joined our department 4 months ago. I'd been building Atlas for 11. She was smart, polished, and incredibly good at making 5 minutes of preparation sound like 5 months of expertise. More importantly, she was Daniel Mercer's favorite. Daniel was my manager. When Chloe interrupted someone in a meeting, Daniel called it confidence. When I challenged an impossible deadline, he called it negativity. When Chloe forgot a deliverable, she was balancing priorities. When I caught a technical problem before launch, I was told not to overcomplicate things. Office favoritism rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly, like dust behind furniture, until one day you move something and realize how much has been hiding there. Atlas was when I finally moved the furniture. I emailed Daniel immediately. I noticed Chloe is listed as project lead on tomorrow's executive deck. Was that changed by mistake? His response came 9 minutes later. Not a mistake. Let's discuss tomorrow morning. That was all. No explanation, no phone call, just 6 words that erased 11 months of assumptions. I sat back and looked through the glass wall of his office. Daniel was inside talking to Chloe. She laughed at something he said. Neither of them looked toward me. Something cold settled in my stomach. Atlas hadn't started as an executive project. It had started because our operations teams were wasting hours jumping between disconnected systems. I wrote the original proposal, interviewed users, designed the workflows, built the prototype, managed the pilot, and documented every major decision. Daniel had barely cared until the pilot started producing results. Then suddenly he wanted weekly updates, executive summaries, presentation decks, visibility. And during my mid-year review, he'd given me the sentence I had been carrying around for months. You're already doing project lead work. Keep this up and we'll talk during promotion season. Promotion season had arrived. Apparently, so had Chloe. The next morning, Daniel called me into his office. Chloe was already sitting there. That detail almost made me laugh. Almost. Daniel closed the door. I know yesterday's change surprised you. You removed my name from a project I've led for almost a year. We didn't remove your contribution. You removed my title. Chloe shifted in her chair. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. Atlas is entering a different phase. Leadership believes Chloe is better positioned for executive communication and stakeholder management. Leadership? Yes. Who specifically? Silence. Tiny, but noticeable. Daniel leaned back. This isn't productive. There it was, the corporate emergency exit. Ask an uncomfortable question and suddenly the question itself becomes the problem. I looked at Chloe. Do you know the current exception workflow? Her eyes flicked toward Daniel. I've been reviewing the documentation. That wasn't my question. Daniel cut in. "You'll continue supporting Atlas as the technical subject matter expert." For a moment, I couldn't believe he'd actually said it. Chloe would receive the project lead title. I would teach her how to lead the project. Elegant, like stealing someone's car and asking them to stay around because you haven't learned where the headlights are. "And my promotion?" I asked. Daniel folded his hands. "I don't think this cycle is the right time." That one landed. The promotion wasn't merely delayed. The project that was supposed to prove I deserved it had been given to the person Daniel preferred. I could feel anger rising, hot and immediate. But I didn't give it to him. No raised voice, no accusation, no dramatic exit. Corporate politics loves emotional witnesses. One angry sentence can become a paragraph in an HR document. So I simply nodded. Understood. Daniel visibly relaxed. That was his mistake. He thought understood meant accepted. At 2 that afternoon, we entered the executive conference room. Rain streaked the windows behind the long table. Laptops opened, coffee steamed in paper cups. The VP of operations sat near the projector while 2 directors discussed quarterly numbers. Daniel began the presentation. "I'm excited to show you what we've built over the past year." We've. Then he gestured toward Chloe. "And Chloe will be leading Atlas through its next phase." Someone smiled. "Congratulations!" A few people applauded. I sat 3 chairs away. For 11 months, I'd watched Atlas grow from a crude prototype into something departments were actively requesting. Now I was watching someone else receive applause for leading it. Chloe started presenting. The first slides were easy: problem, opportunity, pilot results. She spoke smoothly, repeating language I'd written in the original deck. Then the VP interrupted. "What happens when a client has 2 conflicting authorization states across systems?" Chloe stopped, just for a second. But I knew that second. It was the moment someone reaches the edge of what they've memorized. "Well," she began, "the platform reconciles those automatically." The VP frowned. "Automatically how?" Another pause. Chloe looked toward Daniel. Daniel looked toward me. Nobody spoke. And suddenly, the room felt different. Because titles could be edited overnight. PowerPoint slides could be rewritten. Credit could be reassigned with a few keystrokes. But knowledge was harder to steal. I explained the exception logic calmly and answered the VP's follow-up questions. He nodded. "Good. That's exactly what I was worried about." Then he looked at Chloe. "Make sure that logic survives the rollout." "Absolutely," she said. I said nothing, but something had shifted. After the meeting, everyone filed toward the elevators. I returned to my desk and opened Jira, then my email archive, then the original Atlas proposal. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning to complain. I simply wanted a clean record of what I had built. Ticket histories, email approvals, meeting notes, architecture decisions, pilot reports, dates, names, facts. Because Daniel could change a PowerPoint slide, he couldn't change 11 months of timestamps. And before that week was over, I would discover that someone outside our company had started paying very close attention to Atlas. By Friday morning, Chloe had been project lead for less than 48 hours. Atlas was already beginning to crack. The first problem appeared at 9:17. A message from operations flashed across our team channel. Atlas Pilot is rejecting previously approved client records. Is something down? Chloe answered immediately, looking into it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Another message appeared. We now have 31 records stuck in review. I knew exactly what had happened. During Thursday's rollout meeting, Chloe had approved a configuration change I'd specifically warned against. It looked harmless on paper, but it bypassed one of the validation rules Atlas used to resolve conflicting records. I opened the JIRA ticket. My warning was still there, timestamped 3 weeks earlier. So was Chloe's comment from yesterday. Proceeding, risk appears minimal. Daniel appeared beside my desk. Can you jump into conference room B? Inside, Chloe had her laptop connected to the screen. 3 dashboards glowed red. Daniel closed the door. What happened? Chloe turned toward me. The validation layer isn't behaving as expected. I looked at the dashboard. It is behaving exactly as expected. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? The configuration change removed the fallback check. Chloe crossed her arms. That wasn't clear in the documentation. It was in the JIRA ticket you approved. Silence. The air conditioning hummed above us. Daniel looked at Chloe, then at me. Can you fix it? There it was again. Not who caused it, not why was the warning ignored, just could I repair it? I could. And because 31 client records were stuck behind their corporate politics, I did. For the next hour, I rolled back the change, rebuilt the affected queue, and verified every record. At 10:46, the dashboard returned to green. Daniel exhaled. Great work, team. Team. Corporate language has a remarkable ability to distribute success evenly while concentrating blame with surgical precision. I returned to my desk. 5 minutes later, Chloe posted in the project channel, "Issue resolved. We identified a configuration conflict and corrected it. Atlas is stable again." No mention of my warning. No mention of the rollback. No mention of who had actually fixed it. I stared at the message. Then I did something extremely boring. I saved it. By lunchtime, I had created a private folder containing the original Atlas proposal, key email threads, meeting notes, and references to JIRA tickets documenting major decisions. Nothing confidential left company systems. Nothing was forwarded to a personal account. I wasn't collecting ammunition. I was making sure I could reconstruct the truth if someone tried to rewrite it. And someone was already trying. That afternoon, Daniel sent an email to senior leadership. Great work by Chloe today, identifying and resolving an unexpected Atlas configuration issue during rollout preparation. I read it twice, then opened the JIRA history. Chloe hadn't identified the problem. She had approved the change that caused it. My name appeared on the warning. My name appeared on the rollback. My name appeared on the resolution. Daniel's email said Chloe. For the first time, I wondered whether this was bigger than favoritism. Maybe Daniel wasn't simply helping his favorite succeed. Maybe he needed her to succeed. Because if Chloe failed publicly, his decision to replace me would suddenly become difficult to explain. Monday made that possibility harder to ignore. At 10 o'clock, we had our weekly Atlas leadership meeting. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase marker. Rain tapped against the windows while Chloe walked everyone through the rollout schedule. She reached the integration timeline. We can probably move deployment forward 2 weeks. I looked up. No. Everyone turned toward me. Chloe smiled tightly. Why not? Because security validation isn't finished. We've already tested the core workflows. Core workflows aren't the same as security validation. Daniel leaned forward. Can we avoid getting buried in technical details? I almost smiled. Those technical details determine whether we're ready. Chloe clicked to the next slide. I think we're being overly cautious. I looked directly at Daniel. If we deploy before validation is complete, I want my objection documented in the meeting notes. The room went still. Not dramatically, just enough. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's unnecessary. Then waiting 2 weeks shouldn't be a problem. Nobody spoke. Finally, the operations director cleared his throat. I'd rather not rush validation. Chloe's proposed date disappeared from the plan. For the first time since losing Atlas, I saw Daniel look genuinely irritated. Not because I was wrong, because I had been right where other people could see it. After the meeting, he caught me near the elevators. You need to be careful. The doors opened behind me with a soft chime. About what? How you're coming across. I asked for a security review to be completed. You challenged the project lead in front of leadership. She proposed a risky deployment date. Daniel lowered his voice. This is exactly why we talked about executive presence. There it was. My refusal to approve a bad decision was now evidence that I didn't deserve the role. I stepped into the elevator. Anything else? He stared at me for a moment. No. The doors closed between us. That evening, I stayed late, not to work on Atlas. For once, I was updating my resume. The office after 7 felt almost abandoned. Cleaning carts whispered through distant corridors, city lights shimmered against the windows, and my monitor illuminated the empty desk beside mine. I hadn't applied anywhere in years. Writing my resume felt strangely uncomfortable at first. Then I reached the Atlas section. Designed original concept, built prototype, led cross-functional pilot, reduced processing time, developed rollout architecture. The more I wrote, the clearer something became. Daniel had spent months convincing me that project lead was the prize, but the title was never the valuable part. The valuable part was that I had actually learned how to build the thing. At 8:13, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I ignored it. 30 seconds later, an email appeared in my personal inbox. The sender was a recruiter named Melissa Grant. Her message was short. Hi, I came across your background through a former colleague who spoke highly of your operations platform work. I'm recruiting for a senior product role and wondered if you'd be open to a confidential conversation. I leaned back. Plenty of recruiters sent messages like that. Usually they were vague, automated, and forgettable. Then I read the next line. The company is specifically looking for someone who has built an internal workflow platform from the ground up. That was unusually specific. I checked the company name in her signature. My stomach tightened. They weren't some random startup. They were one of our competitors, a serious one. I didn't answer immediately. The next morning, Daniel scheduled another meeting with me. This time, HR was invited. The subject line said, Role Alignment Discussion. That phrase had the warmth of a locked door. At 11:00, I entered the room. Daniel sat beside an HR business partner named Rebecca. She gave me a professional smile. Daniel didn't. We've had some concerns, he began. About? Your engagement since the Atlas leadership transition. I almost admired the speed. 4 business days. That was all it had taken for losing my project, fixing Chloe's mistake, and preventing a premature deployment to become an engagement problem. Rebecca opened a notebook. Daniel continued. There have been instances where your communication could be perceived as undermining Chloe's authority. Which instances? He paused. The rollout meeting. When I requested completed security validation? And yesterday's incident. When I fixed the configuration failure? Rebecca looked from him to me. That was interesting. Daniel apparently hadn't expected me to answer with specifics. I kept my voice calm. If there are concerns about my performance, I'd like concrete examples documented. Daniel's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Because documentation worked both ways. Rebecca nodded. That's reasonable. Daniel said nothing. The meeting ended 12 minutes later. No warning, no disciplinary action, just a vague reminder about collaborative communication. When I returned to my desk, I opened my personal phone. Melissa's email was still there. I read it once more. Then I replied. I'm available Thursday after 6 o'clock. Her answer came 4 minutes later. Perfect. One thing before we speak. The compensation range for this role tops out at $180,000. I stared at the number. Then, across the office, Chloe called my name. She was standing beside Daniel's desk with her laptop open. Can you help me with Atlas? Something isn't matching the architecture notes. For almost a year, I had built the system. Then they denied my promotion, gave my credit to someone else, and questioned my attitude when I protected the project from their mistakes. Now they wanted me to walk across the room and teach my replacement how my own architecture worked. I closed Melissa's email. Then I stood. And for the first time, I understood that the most important decision in front of me had nothing to do with getting Atlas back. The evidence was piling up. The project was wobbling. And Daniel had just made his first mistake in front of HR. If you've ever spent months building something only to watch someone else walk into the room and take the credit, you already know how this feels. Thursday evening, I took the recruiter's call from my car. Not because I was being dramatic, I simply didn't want Daniel walking past my desk while I discussed leaving the company. Melissa got straight to the point. The company is North Star Systems. They're expanding their operations software division. I knew North Star. Everyone in our industry did. They competed with us for several major clients, and unlike the vague startups that usually filled my inbox, they had money, infrastructure, and a reputation for moving quickly. What exactly are they looking for? I asked. Someone who has built workflow platforms from zero, not someone who managed one after launch. Someone who understands the architecture because they created it. That distinction wasn't subtle. For almost a year, Daniel had treated my technical knowledge like something useful but secondary. North Star was describing it as the reason they wanted to speak with me. Melissa continued. Base salary is up to $180,000. I actually looked at my phone. My current salary was nowhere near that. And they know where I work? Yes. Do they know about Atlas? A short pause. They know you've led significant internal platform work. Nothing confidential. Good answer. I made something clear immediately. I won't share proprietary code, internal documents, client information, or anything belonging to my employer. I wouldn't ask you to. What would I be building? A competing product from scratch. There it was. Not stealing Atlas, not copying Atlas, building something new, using the expertise I'd spent years developing. For the first time all week, I smiled. Set up the interview. The next morning, Atlas broke again. This time, Chloe couldn't hide it behind a cheerful Slack update. A reporting module started duplicating transactions during a test run, and operations stopped the pilot before the bad data spread. At 9:06, Chloe messaged me. "Can you come to conference room B? Urgent." I walked in and found Chloe, Daniel, and 2 engineers staring at a dashboard. Daniel pointed toward the screen. "What's causing this?" I checked the logs. Then I noticed something. "Who changed the processing sequence?" Chloe answered. "I simplified it yesterday." "Did you review the dependency notes?" "I reviewed the documentation." One engineer turned his laptop toward us. "The dependency warning is in Jira." There was my comment. 6 weeks old. Clear enough that nobody needed a translator. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Can we just fix this?" Again, his favorite made the decision. The project failed. And somehow my role was still to arrive carrying the fire extinguisher. "I can help restore the previous sequence," I said. Chloe frowned. "Help?" "Yes, you're project lead. I'll show you where the failure occurred, but the change and verification should stay with your team." Daniel stared at me. "You know this system better than anyone." "I do." "Then why wouldn't you just fix it?" The room became quiet. Because he'd accidentally asked the perfect question. If I knew Atlas better than anyone, why wasn't I leading it? I didn't say that. I didn't need to. One of the engineers suddenly became extremely interested in his keyboard. "I'll support the recovery," I said calmly, "but Chloe should own the decision." Daniel couldn't argue without exposing the contradiction. So Chloe spent the next 2 hours reversing her own change. I helped when she asked technical questions. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't withhold information. I simply stopped carrying responsibilities that came with a title they'd deliberately given someone else. By noon, Atlas was stable. By 2:30, Daniel had sent me another email. "I'd like to discuss your level of cooperation on Atlas." I forwarded nothing, deleted nothing. I just left the message exactly where it was. Another timestamp, another record. Monday brought something more interesting. Rebecca from HR appeared beside my desk. "Do you have 10 minutes? Her tone was different from our previous meeting, less scripted. We entered a small conference room. She closed the door. "I've been reviewing some documentation related to Atlas." I waited. "There are inconsistencies between how project ownership has been described recently and the historical records." My expression stayed neutral. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Jira history, meeting notes, some email records." Daniel had apparently forgotten something important. Corporate systems have memory. Rebecca continued. "I'd like you to send me a timeline of your involvement with Atlas." "I can do that." "Facts only. Dates, responsibilities, major decisions." That was exactly what I wanted. No accusations, no revenge, just a timeline. When I returned to my desk, Chloe was standing in Daniel's office. Through the glass, I could see him speaking quickly while she listened. Then he noticed me. For the first time since giving away my project, Daniel didn't look annoyed. He looked nervous. My phone vibrated. Melissa. "Northstar loved your first interview. They want to move you directly to the final round." I looked from the message to Daniel behind the glass. Inside the company, HR was beginning to ask who had really built Atlas. Outside the company, someone was finally asking what that experience was worth. And those two questions were about to become very uncomfortable for my boss. Rebecca had asked for a factual Atlas timeline, so I gave her one. Original proposal, prototype, Jira tickets, pilot meetings, architecture decisions, Daniel's promise to discuss a promotion, Chloe's appointment as project lead, and the failures that followed. No adjectives, no accusations, just dates. Facts are surprisingly loud when nobody is allowed to interrupt them. At 10:20, Rebecca emailed me. "Can you confirm who approved the project lead change?" I answered honestly. Daniel told me leadership made the decision. I was not included in those discussions. 20 minutes later, our operations director stopped beside my desk. "Do you have a minute?" We walked into an empty meeting room. He closed the door. "Did Daniel ever tell you I supported replacing you with Chloe?" I chose my words carefully. "He said leadership believed she was a better fit." The director stared at me. I never had that conversation with him. There it was. Daniel hadn't merely favored Chloe, he had used leadership as camouflage, and now someone had pulled the camouflage away. That afternoon, Atlas failed its rollout readiness review. Not catastrophically, almost worse. The presentation exposed dozens of small gaps Chloe couldn't explain. Incomplete dependencies, unclear ownership, missing validation steps, and deadlines that didn't match the engineering schedule. The VP finally closed his laptop. "Why are we discovering this now?" Chloe looked toward Daniel. Daniel looked toward me. I didn't rescue either of them. The VP noticed. "Who designed the original rollout plan?" "I did," I said. "And was this the plan?" "No." Silence. Daniel leaned forward. "We've made adjustments as the project evolved." "Who approved those adjustments?" Another silence. Chloe answered quietly. "Daniel and I did." The room changed, not with shouting, with attention, the kind that makes everyone suddenly sit straighter. The VP looked at Daniel. "Then I want the original plan compared against the current one before we proceed." Atlas was paused. Daniel's face went pale. 2 hours later, Rebecca sent another meeting invitation. This time, I wasn't invited. Daniel was. So was his director. So was legal. The conference room blinds stayed closed for nearly 90 minutes. When Daniel finally emerged, he walked past my desk without looking at anyone. The next morning, Chloe's title disappeared from the Atlas project page. No announcement, no dramatic email, just project lead, pending review. Corporate justice, apparently, also knew how to use stealth mode. At lunch, Melissa called. "North Star wants to make an offer." I stepped outside. Cold wind moved between the buildings while traffic rolled through the intersection. "What's the number?" $180,000 base. Even though she'd mentioned the range before, hearing it as an actual offer felt completely different. There was also a performance bonus, better benefits, and one detail I had to ask her to repeat. What was the title? Senior Product Lead. I looked back through the glass doors of my office building. For months, Daniel had told me I wasn't ready to lead. Another company had interviewed me 3 times and reached the opposite conclusion. "When do they need an answer?" "Friday." "I'll give you one tomorrow." I didn't celebrate yet. There was still one thing I wanted to understand. That afternoon, Rebecca asked me to join her. Daniel wasn't there, neither was Chloe. "We've completed the first stage of our review," she said. "I can't discuss personnel details, but we've identified concerns regarding project attribution, management communication, and decision-making." I nodded. "What happens to Atlas?" "Leadership will decide." "And my role?" She paused. "We'd like to discuss restoring you as project lead." 6 months earlier, that sentence would have felt like victory. Now it felt strangely small. I appreciate that. Rebecca studied my face. But? No but. I smiled politely. I just need some time. When I returned to my desk, Daniel was waiting. Can we talk? We stepped into the hallway. For once, he had no polished management language ready. I heard they're discussing giving Atlas back to you. I heard the same. He nodded slowly. Look, mistakes were made. Interesting choice of grammar. Mistakes had apparently appeared spontaneously, like weather. I was under pressure to make the rollout more visible, he continued. Chloe had strong executive presence. I thought pairing that with your technical expertise would work. Then why remove my name? He didn't answer. Why deny my promotion? Still nothing. Why tell me leadership wanted Chloe when leadership never discussed it? His expression changed. That one hit. I was trying to make the best decision for the department. No, you made the best decision for your favorite. His jaw tightened, but I kept my voice calm. And when it failed, you expected me to quietly repair it. He looked toward the office. Where does this leave us? My phone buzzed in my pocket. North Star had emailed the written offer. $180,000, senior product lead, start date negotiable. I looked at Daniel. I guess leadership will decide. Then I walked back to my desk. The next morning, an internal announcement appeared before I could answer North Star. Daniel Mercer was no longer managing our team. And that wasn't the only consequence waiting for him. Daniel wasn't fired. In some ways, what happened was worse. The company removed him from management, reassigned him to an individual contributor role, and announced that Atlas would temporarily report directly to the operations director. No speech, no public humiliation, just one quiet organizational update that erased the authority Daniel had spent years collecting. Chloe was removed as project lead. HR never told me whether she had been formally disciplined, and I never asked. By then, I understood something important. I didn't need to watch someone else lose in order to know I'd won. At 10:14 that morning, Rebecca called me into a conference room. The operations director was waiting. We'd like you to take Atlas back, he said. This time, the title was official. Project Lead. They also wanted to reopen my promotion discussion. 6 months earlier, I would have walked out of that room feeling 10 feet tall. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Thank you, I said, but I've accepted another position. Rebecca blinked. The director leaned back. With whom? North Star Systems. That produced silence. Real silence. And the role? Senior product lead. He nodded slowly. I didn't mention the salary. I didn't need to. My resignation letter was already prepared. 2 weeks later, I walked through those glass office doors for the last time. No dramatic confrontation, no security escort, no triumphant speech beside Daniel's desk. I documented everything Atlas needed, completed my handoff, thanked the people who had supported me, and left with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, 2 notebooks, and a desk plant I'd somehow kept alive longer than my faith in corporate loyalty. Daniel wasn't there when I left. Maybe that was fitting. 3 weeks later, I walked into North Star. My new badge read, Senior Product Lead. My salary was $180,000. And on my first morning, my new director placed a blank architecture document in front of me. We don't want their system, she said. We want you to build ours. That sentence meant more than the title. more than the money, because they hadn't hired me for Atlas. They hired me for the person who knew how to create something like Atlas from nothing. I opened the document. Blank page, blinking cursor. For almost a year, I'd thought Daniel had stolen my future when he gave my project to his favorite. He hadn't. He'd only stolen my name from a PowerPoint slide. The experience was still mine. The reputation was still mine. And the ability to build the next thing had always been mine. I typed the first line. Then I smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with shouting, revenge, or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with your old boss losing the authority he abused, your work finally speaking for itself, and a new company putting $180,000 behind the value your old one refused to see. I didn't take Atlas with me. I didn't have to. I took the person who built it.